Hey guys, what's up, how's it going? My name is Robin and welcome back to today's video. And inside today's video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys one big mistake that I made inside my TFSA, and I think it's also something that I think a lot of people get wrong, and it's also something that a lot of people need to open their eyes to. And that mistake I'm going to be talking about today in this video is going to be, should you put US stocks inside of your TFSA? That's what we're going to focus on because there's a lot of misconception about this, and I think a lot of people get the wrong idea. So I'm going to give you guys my advice, and I'm going to give you guys what I learned when it comes to sticking US stocks inside of your TFSA. Now, as you guys are probably already aware, the TFSA brings us a lot of benefits in terms of tax-free savings. Any Canadian stocks that are invested inside of a TFSA will give you 100% dividend income as well as stock growth that's 100% tax-free. So it doesn't matter if your stocks grow to be $1 million. At the end of the day, when you take them out of your TFSA, if they are Canadian stocks, they will be 100% tax-free, and you don't have to do anything on your tax return at the end of the day. This allows you to basically grow your investments, and is one of the most underappreciated and most underused ways to grow your passive income if you're a Canadian. I highly suggest, if you guys don't have a TFSA, that you get started investing with one right now, because it really is one of the best ways to earn income tax-free. Now, the other cool thing about the TFSA is that it also allows you to include foreign investments. So if you like to invest in foreign stocks around the world, or if you're like myself and you have an interest in the US stock market, then you can also stick those inside of your TFSA as well. However, there is a bit of a catch if you include any foreign investments inside of your TFSA. And the thing that everybody talks about in that catch that has a lot of people worried is the fact that any kind of dividend income that you make that comes from a foreign stock inside of your TFSA is subject to be taxed at 15%. So that means if you make $1 per dividend per share inside your TFSA, that $1 that you make per share will be taxed at 15%. Now, at the end of the day, I'm going to kind of explore in this video and show you guys why it's probably not as big of a deal as people think, but still it is something to consider depending on what type of US based stocks that you have inside of your TFSA. And even though this might look bad, like I mentioned earlier, I still think at the end of the day that everybody to some degree could really benefit from holding US growth stocks inside of your TFSA. Now, you don't have to go crazy, and I'm never going to go 100% with US growth stocks inside of my TFSA, but it's definitely something to consider. And I think a lot of people should be adding at least a small portion of their TFSA to include some good solid quality US growth stocks. So the next step here is to do a little bit of basic math to kind of see, what is that 15% that we're going to be taxed on really going to look like inside our portfolio, especially as time goes on. So the first thing to consider is that the 15% tax only applies to dividends that we receive. So any kind of stock growth that comes from a US stock inside of the TFSA is still going to be 100% tax free. And as you guys will see, this is basically what offsets any kind of negative that comes from that dividend that's being taxed. So if we're only taxed 15% on our dividend income, it kind of makes sense to focus more on growth stocks and kind of leave some of the more higher dividend yield stocks that we get, maybe that are US based, maybe stick them inside of our RRSP or even a personal account, and keep the growth ones for our TFSA. So if you look at a popular high dividend yield stock like, for example, maybe AT&T that is US based, you can see that this stock has a 7% yield. So this is a pretty high yield. Now, if we think back, obviously the higher the yield, the more will be taxed on when it comes to the dividend income inside of our TFSA. So it kind of makes sense if we're looking at something like AT&T that has that 7% yield, you kind of want something with a lower yield, obviously. So let's instead kind of maybe turn our focus to something like VFE or some kind of S&P 500 fund that has a lower dividend yield, maybe around that 1 to 2%. And let's kind of do some numbers and let's see what the difference is and what you actually be paying on yearly tax between these two types of stocks. So if we take AT&T's 7% dividend yield and we divide it by 15%, which is what we'll tax, we'll end up paying about 1% per year annually in tax if we had that US stock inside of our TFSA. Now, at the end of the day, that 1% isn't the worst thing in the world, but obviously over time, if we're investing like 5, 10, 15, or 20 plus years, that will add up at the end of the day. And any kind of dividend growth or any kind of compounding interest that you get from that stock as well will also kind of, increase that over time. So, it obviously is a bit of money, but it's really not that big of a deal, but still it's something to think about at the end of the day. However, if we look at a stock like VFV, which has a dividend yield around that 1.5% range on average, we will actually be taxed at 0.225 annually. Now think about that for a second. You're getting taxed at a much lower rate. So 0.22% annually is almost like a management fee that you might pay for an ETF. It's next to nothing, really, in my opinion. So basically, you could get 4 years of investment income, and you would pay about the same you'd pay in tax than 1 year with AT&T. So it's kind of interesting to compare the two. But if you do the actual math, that's kind of the difference that you see that you'll see with the two different stocks. So if you guys haven't already kind of basically put the picture together here and basically kind of taken what I've been saying here, and my big mistake that I made in the beginning was that I didn't focus on US growth-based stocks inside my TFSA. Now I did have a robo-advisor with Wealthsimple that did put a good chunk, I think it was about 20 to 30% of my portfolio inside US growth-based stocks. So this kind of helped me out at the end of the day. And this is just like a small little amount because it does add up at the end of the day. So going into the future, one of the big things I'm probably going to be doing is going to be putting more US-based growth stock inside my TFSA and maybe moving some of the dividend stocks that I have into my personal account so that I can get some tax benefits from those dividend income, but also take advantage of US stocks and the fact that they just grow generally more larger than Canadian stocks. And we're going to kind of compare the two here, and let's kind of take a quick peek at something like VFE and see how that growth is compared to some other Canadian stocks. So before we end this video, I just want to do a quick little comparison to two solid ETFs that I hold inside my portfolios. We have one Canadian-based ETF called VDY, and I have another ETF that's VFE, which is the S&P 500 US growth-based ETF that I hold as well. And we're really kind of going to compare the two. And at the end of the day, I love Canadian stocks. I think they're great stocks, and I always hold them. I kind of choose Canadian stocks for the high growth as well as the high dividend growth, and I focus more on just growth when it comes to US stocks. So let's take a peek at the Canadian VDY ETF first. So if we go here on Vanguard, we can see a bit of return information here, and I'm going to take a peek at some of the individual things to just kind of show you guys the difference between like the dividend income, the stock appreciation, and how Canadian stocks fare basically to US stocks. So we can see here on the right side, with VDY, it's mostly focused on dividend income. Here's the income returned by the fund. So this is 4% dividend yield, 5% yield. So you guys can see that this is more yield-based ETF. And this makes a lot of sense to hold it inside your TFSA or hold it inside a personal account because you get tax benefits for holding Canadian stocks and their dividends. But if you look at the capital gains for some of these Canadian stocks, it's not as much as what we'll see from the S&P 500. It's still pretty decent at the end of the day. So 15%, 4%, 22%, 4%, 17%. So if we add those two together, we get the total return here on the right column. So 20%, 8%, 26%, 8%. And at the end of the day, if you go here on the summary, since this fund basically started, this fund has returned 9% per year annually on an average basis, which is a pretty good solid fund, especially for Canadian stocks. I'm pretty happy with that at the end of the day. It is a monthly dividend ETF and it's pretty solid. So it's great to hold, and I will always hold it and always have a good chunk of my portfolio with Canadian-based stocks. But if you turn over to the S&P 500, you're going to see a bit of a difference here. And remember, this fund is more growth-based, not dividend-based. So once again, we're taking advantage of that tax benefit inside of our TFSA, and we're paying less on the dividends. So if we go annually here for the S&P 500 VFE, we can see here that the capital gains are way higher inside this fund. Now keep in mind that this fund is it just started in 2013, so there's not as much data, and we've seen a lot of growth over the past, I'd say like 10 years or so in US stocks. So it's a little bit inflated to be a little bit higher than what it normally would. I'd say it'd be more around the 10 to 11% per year average at the end of the day, but we've just seen a lot of growth recently. So 14% gain in 2020, 2019 was 22%, 11%, 18%, and you can just see more consistent higher yield from the capital gains, even 40% in 2013. I don't know if you guys can see that, a little bit solid there. And if we go on the right side, the income generated, which is the dividend yield that we're being actually taxed on, is very small, 1.69%, 2%, 1%, 1%. So at the end of the day, you got to ask yourself, are you willing to take a 40% return to pay a tiny bit of tax on a 2% yield? Same here. Are you willing to take a 21% return to take a tiny little bit of tax on a 1.96% yield? And at the end of the day, I say for sure, because if you look at the total return, it's just significantly higher on average. And if we go to the the summary page here, we can see here that the average return, once again, this is obviously pretty inflated for the past couple years, were really good for US growth-based stocks, and this fund isn't very old, but 18% on average. Once again, this might be more towards 11 to 12%, maybe 10%. Over time is probably what it will be. But you guys can just see that if we're going to get major good stock appreciation from US stocks, it makes a lot of sense to hold them inside of our TFSA. So as you guys can see, at the end of the day, here's my opinion on this. I'm probably going to be moving more growth-based US stocks inside my TFSA, keeping a good chunk of it Canadian growth-based / dividend stocks as well, and also focusing on Canadian stocks inside my personal account. I think Canadian stocks are great, but they're more growth-based and dividend-focused, while US stocks has shown us over time to kind of grow the most, so it makes most sense to get as much as that growth tax-free as possible and stick it inside of our TFSA and maybe our RSP as well at the end of the day. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope it kind of opened your eyes to the fact that, you know, it's not necessarily a bad thing to have US stocks inside your TFSA. In fact, it's not necessarily a bad thing even to have dividend growth-based US stocks inside your TFSA, as long as they have good solid stock appreciation and growth over time to kind of make the difference there, so that if you're paying a little bit more in tax, at least that growth is that's gonna be tax-free at the end of the day. It's gonna make it worth it. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, let me know and I'll try to get back to them the best that I can. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you guys later, and have yourself a good weekend.